Hello everyone. Welcome to the discussion on materials. It's not a discussion we often have, though a lot of our time is spent figuring out materials, detailing them, working out construction details, drawings. So we have 45 minutes. I have a set of questions for each of you. Some of them are open for others to pitch in as well. The idea is through the questions, hopefully we'll cover a bit of ground. So some questions we'll open up, but if you really itch to add something to the previous person's question, you can feel free to add that as well. I'll delve straight into the conversation. I'll start off with Ashwin in sort of setting the context. So where do you draw inspiration from with regard to people who explore materials, material exploration in architecture? Of all the architects you know across the world, presently practicing or who passed away, is there anybody whom you look up to as somebody who really explores materials and the possibilities, and why do you like their work?
So, I think, hi everyone, I think the perspective towards approaching any design over a period has completely changed. Immediately after the graduation, obviously, I always had a benchmark or a reference that I always looked up to. Rougher works, get inspired from. From the initial days itself, I normally didn't get influenced by materials. That's not the first thing. But that around like fourth year of my practice, like then I started exploring on materials and everything. So used to work with natural elements in most of the designs, because I still strongly believe you have a natural element. It makes the structure, your architecture more grounded, humane, and always have some kind of connection. So in that perspective, I think we had this YAF some time back. So during that time, had the privilege of seeing Solano's work, Solano Benitez. I was deeply impressed. I really got shocked. How can one man think floor, wall, even ceiling, everything in bricks? So that changed the perception. So that kind of design attitude or maturity to set everything out in the physical realm in such a simplistic expression takes a very sophisticated thought process or backward. So, if you want, I think this is the only name I can actually recall. But now, in the current process, the perspective have completely changed. Design has become more of a chase for to grasp essence which are not directly seen. Even that reflects in the materials. It has more to do with human behavior, how an organization works, how a community builds up. So what material that I get impressed or inspires me may not be applicable to a group. So I think sometimes architects tend to over-engineer. Sometimes we should just design 80%. Leave that 20% for the users to mark their sign on. Yeah, that's it.
I remember as a student, I didn't have much of an idea about materials, constructions, details. It's something that over time, when you have a project and you have a flooring material that you have to pick, then you start paying attention to a lot of things. A lot of looking at real life projects was where I learned about materials, and you see good projects and you start asking what material was used, how was it done. There's actually a lot of vendors coming to the office, seeing vendors at stalls, exhibitions, that I learned a lot about materials. It's not something I imagine happens a lot in colleges. My question is to you, Rikhina. Where and how does one learn about materials as an architect? You've been practicing for quite a few years now. Is your experience the same, that it's mostly in practice? How do you go? And I also have to say that sometimes I feel nowadays when I go to a showroom, I'm like trying to go and pick that material and come back really quick. and I don't have time to look around too much. And I think I learn less nowadays about new materials because I don't have the time for the vendors. I don't have the time to go. Sometimes once in a while you visit a project, but yeah. So where and how does one learn about materials?
Good evening, everyone. My story is a bit different from others because I started my firm soon after getting my degree. I had zero experience in materials. I zero experience in like how the office works, like literally nothing. My initial study was on obviously on the materials. The first thing was my textbooks. Then was magazines, the cutouts the client got me because initially I got just 2-3 projects, and then obviously the Google and other search engines. Later on, from the site, I started learning each by each. Like I just know just the basic laterite which used for the walls. Then I realized that laterite itself has 3 categories, which used in foundation, which is in basement and in wall. That was an eye-opening for me. So I thought like this is my first lesson I'm learning from the site. So this was a hit. I learned from site. I learned from the basic masons, the fabricators. That's how the material weathers, how the material reacts, how material won't like each other. They need a void. These all things I learned from the site. Later on, a second thought was to create a library at my office. To every vendor, to every executives who comes and meet me, I will tell them I don't need any physical catalogs. I need exact materials so that I can feel the texture, how they soak in water. If there is an exterior material which has happened to be a new one, which is new in market, I try out in my exterior spaces to know myself, to experiment with materials because there was no vendor for me. I myself made out of, I was explaining the things out of things which I was inventing from these. And then was these, from these vendors and these materials, I have experience from their exposure of sun, weather and everything. I got an idea on that. Then I was starting doing the factory visits for each new materials, for the walks and like any new material I come, I plan somehow the factory visits and I get an idea on what is happening with these, like how it's going to be. Then obviously the queries and to know the qualities of how long it may stay if I propose it. So these are where my initial things to get to know about materials. And obviously the most important point was cost occupancy evaluation from the clients. Even though I give any material, the feedback was very important. So each projects were a lesson for me. So I won't repeat in my next project, and I myself believe that material should replaceable or it should what do you say? It should be practically we can implement new things or we can experiment on things so that it gets better. That has a home actually, so called as a home. And even the faulty message, the unlooking leeches or I study from the cracks, the stains which is happening. So these all were my study materials and I implement on materials and I try on things new with these. That's how my material study worked till now.
So yeah, I think post-occupancy evaluation is something that I've heard a lot of clients complaining to me about. Not my clients, but they're saying generally architects, they don't come back and see, and they're not aware whether it works or it doesn't work. So learning on the go through projects is one, but that also takes a toll on your credibility as an architect. So ideally, there has to be some mechanism to have the learning in advance, because otherwise you're trying and testing ideas and they're failing, either as prototyping or just working in other offices, so that the wisdom of the office gets transferred, rather than all of us, all the graduates making these mistakes on sites and clients having to suffer. So based on what you said, do you think what needs to change in education, as Komal was also asking, like is there something that you'd suggest in terms of how students could be trained better to understand materials, performance of these materials?
Yeah, during our college days, we had site visits every Thursday evening. We have to go to random any of the site and sketch what is happening. It can be rebarring of columns. That's how the basic idea I got. Like I had a couple of things while I started my practice. So it's not that too much mistakes I have made. I corrected it. I used to take photographs only after 1 year of like post inauguration of the building. So I learned from it.
So the weekly site visits were when you were in...
when we are in college.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's quite important to add in syllabus, to keep a site visits, or you have to tie up with a nearby architect, like from the very basic, the setting out to the interior. There are like a lot of materials. So they can have, through the course of period, they will learn everything, so and so.
That makes a lot of sense. Any other suggestions, the rest of you, on from your experience of how material? Because I don't think you learn materials and performance in theory. You have to see it, you have to touch it, you have to have... I mean, in college you can design a building, but unless you have to pick something and build it, I don't think it will register in the head. Do you have any suggestions on like what can be done differently in education? So I think site visits is a nice idea. Like just going to sites often is a great idea.
Yeah, just adding on to, I think it can be relevant also. We have the notion of building performance. Everything should last. So that necessarily might not be relevant for every project. In some projects, I have seen situation to hold the community together. That material should last only for 6 months because there is some kind of participation that's happening in the community. So that kind of material won't give checklist on a spec sheet. So yeah, and obviously the design attitude is to bring in sensibility. So the touch and feel part is there, but there is no shortcut. Even if you learn from that, an architect who do lot of simulations also, materials will definitely misbehave. How experienced you are, but it's your frequent participation with the site is the key actually. That attitude has to be developed.
Good evening. It's good to be on a fire line after some time, Aabid. I think for the education side, when we talk about materials, it's not just about brick and mortar. Everything that is skin, flesh and bone of a building is material. And that's a huge list. That's a long list. 22 years and we are still learning about materials. So it's practically impossible to learn about materials and graduate out of a college. And we always question about this idea about industry-ready architects being nurtured in a college. And there is no term like an industry-ready architect. No, there is nothing like that. So I think what we need to nurture in an education institution is this awareness that it's not just about one or two materials. It's not just about perpendicular notes on the lines. It's not just about form. And there is a larger responsibility, and you need to research quite a lot before you actually even touch the paper on a day-to-day basis, on a project-by-project basis, on a context-to-context basis. And that awareness is important, that before you go, you cannot go into a place or a project with a preconceived idea, okay, now I'm going to use a brick building. That whole idea is gone about such an idea about the material. So if you can create this awareness that material is the essence of architecture, and for that you need to spend a lot of time on ideating about material, then I think that is a good idea that you can nurture in an education institution.
Yeah, I think definitely you can't teach everything in 5 years. And because you said industry ready, I remember going to a college and with 5 people talking about each of our definitions of what is industry ready. And all our definitions were different. Some people had very abstract ideas, like very conceptual ideas about industry ready. Some people were talking about AutoCAD and commands and things like that. So you're right, there's definitely the fire doesn't come, but there are sensitivities, there are attitudes, that, as you were saying, that should be nurtured, and could be definitely nurtured, and ideally, yes. Anand?
Hi all. So when it comes to the academics perspective, when it comes to student knowing about the material, I had a very interesting experience back in my office. There was one intern who was designing a furniture, so we gave them. So the design came out. So I just asked them this simple question: how does it work? So what's the material that it should be? So and there is an interesting answer came from them. So that's your duty. It's not mine. I mean, it's the design is done. It looks good, and now you have to figure it out how this works. So that is what's happening right now. We are going into a 5.5-inch screen Pinteresty world, in which people look everything in that perspective, and they don't know how that works on the real ground and how this thing. So when I was working in my internship, so I had an interesting time working with people who are from Edinburgh University. So they had studios in which they had to build actual one-on-one scale furnitures with materials, and so they at least know like the joineries, the connections that they are doing, the metal things. So there should be some kind of subjects or something in which they know what they are building up. So
and actually build it.
Yeah, actually build it. Maybe like
once in 5 years to actually.
no, I mean maybe you could have like similar workshops every year in which you could pair up like different groups from the college itself, and they can. It takes only one day. It's like we all have this one day problem that happens here. So something like same kind of thing. If they understand the understanding of like there is a small thing. We all know that the dimension of a table is 75 centimeter. What happens? It becomes 80. What happens? It becomes 70. They don't know these things. So that is what most of the people has to be learning at the end of the 5 years, like the elements, the dimensions, the material. I mean, what material could be used for? I mean, so like if you start putting like the simple workshops. I mean, we do that sometimes with the office. So then only they can understand. Okay, this shit doesn't work like that. So,
Rikhina, you think you want to say something?
I was planning for the colleges, we can have a vendor presentation. Exactly the person who sells, the entrepreneur itself. So they come and explain the materials, how it works. So that also value adds for the students to know about new materials in markets, where all it can be installed. And even we can create a studio inside, like a library collection, where they go for a market study and collect these pieces and put it in a shelf. Like it can continuously be done by every year for the first year students. So we have a material library.
I think this. I mean, if we start putting effort, I think there's a lot of possibilities. And I think something about post occupancy and even like in the first year making something, putting it out there and seeing in 5 years what happens. You leave it outside or you use it for 5 years, how it's life. But I think there's something, as you said, in how the industry works, that we operate with images. We are presenting as images. Like this is something I want to ask at the end. Maybe we'll come back to it. But when we don't have a discussion where somebody is presenting one detail after the other. Like it's very rare. Like other than like Sonita, Benito, very rarely do we have architects presenting that this was one small detail. We end up showing a lot of images, and then that's the project, and then we move on to the next project. There's no space for the conversation on that, which is something I think we need to.
That's why I think it's very important that in the very first year, that students should be sensitized that architecture is a craft and not a craft. It's not a yeah, that architecture is a craft and not an image. So when it is a craft, then you have to have a material. It has to stand, it has to work. You have to touch it, you have to feel it, you have to experience it and do it. I think that education is very important from the first year.
Also, I think you can't see material in isolation. It comes with construction and detailing. There's like this one package that you have to touch the material, you have to put it together, like the gaps that you were talking about between materials, that has to be done. Only then you really get sensitized. So typically, as in practice for us, like a detail is, or a material selection is costs, durability, maintenance, and aesthetics. Those are like some of the fundamental things that we're thinking about. Are there any ethics, principles, or philosophy involved when choosing a material for an element or a space or a project? Vivek?
Yeah, there are several ways of looking at it. There are practices like Solano, there are practices like we do. where often the material is a starting point of the thought process. And there are practices like others where there is, you put people first, you people context first, you people space first, and identify what material works best to create that kind of a context, that kind of a space. Or there are people which says that, about contextuality, about identity. You create a space and you still try to acknowledge what is the right material in that local context to come up with a certain kind of an experience which you can create only there and not somewhere else. Okay, so this position that as an architect that you take is definitely part of your philosophy. It's completely part of your philosophy. And there has to be a philosophy there to make you understand what is your starting point, what is your process, and what is your end point. So basically, a site is the same. A client and his budget is the same. What makes each project different is the starting point, the process, and the ending. And that is based on your philosophy for sure. And material is definitely a major part of the decision of your philosophy. So that has always been a very important part of our whole process. So either it is design and then put materials, which is completely different when you think with materials. And the right detail is something that adds right meaning to a project. Right meaning to a edge, right meaning to a space, right meaning to a furniture. And it is, that is the right detail. So you cannot define it in a sentence because depending on the context, time, place, and people and budget, everything changes. Now, I've been often, when we discuss in the office, and we have this presentation called Think with Materials, and then we have the studios coming and presenting about their projects and how materials come and, go in certain kind of details in the projects. And there is a tendency among young architects to add a lot of detail, especially in the office, where we want to explore, the client is paying to design, so you have to design. You have to show number of sheets, you have to show number of designs, a number of details, so that when you look to every detail, there has to be some detail. So there is a design. So we have often contested that kind of a position by asking, why don't we think of a detail which will reduce design, which will reduce human intervention, which will reduce cost for the clients, which will reduce the maintenance aspect of the clients, which will increase the sustainability and the life of the client, the building performance of the project, and that is the detail. Now, otherwise, with the amount of materials, amount of products that you have in the markets, amount of books and amount of Pinterest and amount of YouTubes in your markets, number of details in a project will not define the quality of projects anymore. Why that detail and why that is, I think every single architect has to have an answer for that why. And that depends on practice to practice.
So, I was reminded of a presentation, it's online on YouTube. Kevin Lowe talking about one of Scarpa's projects. And it's interesting, so he says a lot of nice things about the project. Then at one point he says, but I also think, and then for the next, I think for a good portion, he says how there are so many details for the sake of details. He shows pictures and says, well, what's the point of this detail? Like, why do you need that detail there? What is its relevance? Well, there are a lot of details that are very experiential, very beautiful, and they make a lot of impact, as you said. But there's also, as you said, often a tendency to detail, and then sometimes you don't know what the point of the detail is. So yeah, in some sense, there was a question I want to ask that in terms of this, is it the plan, the section, the experience, and then the material, or how does it work? I think you kind of answered that. Anand, my question kind of links to the question I asked Vivek. Is there an ethics when you choose a material? Like, so, is there a right material, an appropriate material? Is there principles to follow? Or is it just about cost and easiness and durability and maintenance? Is there a morally right material? Is there an immoral material?
Yeah, obviously. That's like a very interesting and it's a very tricky question also, say, while we are practicing. Because obviously, when we think of design as an architect, when we think of design, I mean choosing a material, there should be an ethical this thing. I mean Vivek sir already told that we always ask this thing, why this material? Why we have to use this? I mean what's this thing? So there is an interesting example that came into our practice itself. When we designed our first project, that's the memorial, which we all know, Punjabinash Memorial, we documented it after almost 3 years. So it almost traveled 6 or 7 seasons, I mean you could say. And by the time when we went back and we saw that building, it was as same. There is no major renovations that we have to do, and we didn't even clean it also. So that is the point that we understood, that choosing a material into the building, so it becomes, the design becomes timeless through the material also. So like I have seen a lot of buildings in which like even when I was doing my architecture this thing also, so you go to all these websites like online websites and all, and you see all goody pictures and all, you go to the building and you get like a total different perspective that you don't understand this like okay, this is what I am going to this. Then what happens is like we do the case study and we take the photos from online and then we present it. So this is what is exactly happening in the almost every scenario. So while we design a project, like we tend to convince the client that each material that use there should be ethical to what you do. I mean there are different factors for that. One is cost effectiveness. So you are spending 1,000 rupees on something. What's the amount of, I mean, cost value that you are getting? So because most of us are working on residential projects, so we have ROI for every other projects. We don't have ROI for residential project. It's a satisfaction level. So we kind of have that kind of conversation with the client so that we can convince them to change their material perspective into something long term. But still, we are working for the bread and butter. So there are compromising factors that happens every day today. We do, like I had a very heat-up conversation with a client right before that I enter into this arena about a material, about choosing material, what he has to work on, because he want to bring up all the Chinese market materials and all the materials from Indonesia, Vietnam, because he had some contact. So I was asking why you want to find it that way. So I guess if I am being very honest for this question, I might lose my business also. So but yeah, we tend to be true with our designs and with our materials. That's why if you look at our Instagram handle also, we don't post anything, because most of the bread and butter project are not, we are not satisfied in our design, what sometimes we do. So the only things that we do, we think the architecture works in that way are the ones that we do. We put in our full heart with all the material selections, all the material challenges and all. So that comes out.
Somewhere in underlying what you're saying, there is a sense of a perfect project. And the perfect project is our dream project. And we can showcase it. But I think, as you said, the reality of practice is you can't always take a principled high ground that I will only do this, because at the end of the day, in some sense, you're a service, and this is open for debate. And it's a very diabolical thing. Like, are you a service provider? Do you have a philosophy? Is there something? For example, would you do golden plated toilets? Is it? Sometimes we get situations where there's and I think this is something that's not in the discussion, public discussion of architecture. It's what's presented on Instagram, what we present in architecture forums is the pure version. Whereas we don't, the pure version is assuming that the architect has 100% control and everything is as the architect wishes. But that's not reality. The reality is that you're in service, you're serving somebody else, you're enabling them to achieve their aspirations and values, their money saved. They're also a stakeholder, they also have some space to take decisions. Vivek?
I don't think there is a perfect balance. I think even Anand was talking about this thresholds of good, average and bad. At least that threshold has to we have to overcome. What are these good projects that we like to showcase? There is no best project that we can showcase. So there is no so that's a constant journey for us to make the number of percentage of projects going into the good category. If somebody has 100, he's already a master. Everybody else will have different percentages. So it depends on that. On the other side, yes, there are clients who have asked whether I come to an architecture firm or I come to a preaching firm. You like to be preaching values. I'm not come to hear what is being preached in a religious institution somewhere. I want this. I want that you have to go for this. And we have tried to educate as much as possible. And there were situations where we thought probably we are not the right persons to we don't love that material. If we don't love a work, if we don't love a material, we might not be able to work with it more than a point. And we won't do justice to the material, neither the client, neither the project. So there were situations where we passed on the project to some other architect, thinking that that kind of a palette, that kind of a design is not ours. And there were situations where we had negotiated and find a common ground, saying that okay, you wanted this and I wanted this, so this is somewhere in between, so yeah, let's go ahead. There is a level of negotiation that you have to do because of course it's not your project.
Yeah,
you always yearn for there, but then at least that average is met. You never go beyond that threshold to make it a poor project for them at all. Yeah.
Ashwin, you seem to be itching to say something.
Regarding the best house, see, before constructing everything, it's a very good practice to set your expectations very low. See, in any project of mine, if the client plants 10 trees, in my perspective or the design philosophy itself, I have considered that's fine, because you have to design your practice also on the overall larger perspective. So what's the major intent? That way. So, but regarding these conflicts, in the initial phase itself, sometimes I might be fortunate. I tend to be very selective. I carefully assess whether we can philosophically align with each other. And so far, that has been good. So, that situations might differ. So, to a certain extent, I haven't faced, no client has forced me to do a certain kind of material. So, I can't give a reaction towards that. But regarding the other part, what I was telling, so I majorly look on the overall picture, and there are certain expectations. If these things cover, and I have to respect the client's dignity or their aspirations rather than my. In the beginning phases, there was a tendency to impose a double height or a triple height in space. Obviously, you tend to get carried away. You think that's architecture. So that's not actually a grounded. So it takes years of practice with experience, no matter who the architect is. So that thing, every architect has to go through. So yeah, to make a structure less intimidating is the best job an architect can do, and that depends on projects and perspective and the imagery aspect, everything. So I'm talking from a residential perspective. Yeah.
I tend to disagree on one point where it's not good to get satisfied.
It's not good.
No, it's not good. Keep your bar. That will keep your bar a little low, because I think you always have to push till the last moment. Last moment might not be the handover for a project. You might have lost that last moment a little before also. But I think it's that urge to not getting satisfied about anything, to create something new, to bring out the best out of every project that you do, will push you out through the project. If there is a project with I think I'm already satisfied, I may not go to the site at all.
Was that what you meant?
I mean, yeah, he said you might get satisfied with 10 trees, planted in a project, might not put every parameter on the project. But I tend to disagree, because I think it is very important for us to push the limit, and only when you have dreams on every little project, you can carry it through. Otherwise, you tend to lose it.
So yeah, just wanted to add what Vivek sir said is absolutely true. So I didn't try to imply that I lose or so. I'm an architect. For a project, I would have, in my scope of works, it will be 10 visits. I will definitely would have completed more than 200 site visits. So I can't, and that depends from various scales. And so obviously, if Magicline Studio, if you consider that tendency is changing, because once the firm grows, then various delegation and everything, that part actually comes through. But finally, it boils down to, you see, if you are with the client on a regular visit, so you really can avoid. But the major conflict part, that so I can confidently say, if I get a client who asks me in the initial discuss about the square feet, I wouldn't be a good architect supporting him. So that's what I was trying to do.
On one side, I used to, and I often think that it's important to have principles, theory, philosophy, and to hold on to it. And not, I remember at one point going to Vinod Serik and saying, I feel like a prostitute when I have to listen to everything the client says, and I'm confused. Who am I? Am I somebody who doesn't? And then interestingly, he said, I've never had an argument with a client, and that completely blew me off. Like, does that mean? It is in some sense. So for me, I think my own lesson was a client that I had. They were an institute, and we started working them in 2016, and we're still working. And at the initial stages, we draw things, and they won't do a little bit, they'll listen to a bit. And at that point, our expectations, okay, at least get the planning right. And over time, I've realized that they ask for more and more services. They ask for more and more details. And so over time, they have become much better clients for us. Which kind of made me realize that maybe I should be more patient with all clients. That maybe today we may not agree, but if I hang around and I'm constantly negotiating, as you say, and pushing them as far as we can push them, there will come a day when we are more or less on the same page. I'll just move on, and maybe you can pitch in over. I wanted to ask this. There's this trend nowadays. So when you went for Kalasham, there was 100 practices presented, and I felt like 80-90% of them all looked similar. There's this monsoon tropical architecture that's become a thing, a style that recently somebody who applied to my office said, I want to join a firm that does tropical monsoon residential architecture. And somehow she got the impression that we don't do, our buildings are not tropical and not residential, and therefore she decided not to join. So my question is to you, Rikhina, what are your thoughts on this new style of I feel it's become a palette of materials. I come across one conversation where one architect was saying the cement finish didn't come out well, so we did putty to make it look like cement finish, and now it looks nice cement finish. And I thought the whole point of tropical and monsoon was to have honesty in expression, and it isn't to put a makeup of that honesty of expression. So somewhere the soul is gone and it's become a palette of materials.
Yeah, see, nowadays from these blogs and everything, the clients are like misunderstood, like this tropical architecture is just a material palette. Not, it's a climate oriented design or climate strategy actually. So we have to sit and educate them, see this is how the humid Kerala climate needs these cross ventilation, we need these kind of openings or so and so materials, like these material palette we have in tropical, we need to have it inside. But what these guys wanted, just the material palette. And they are superimposing me, like I practice on contemporary projects actually, contemporary residential projects. So they wanted this tropical palette merges with these contemporary things. So it was very difficult for me to justify my ethics to the climate. So what I do is I make an extra fin wall or any screen walls to protect from direction. So I get an air void, which replicate the cement texture. I make these Everest panel boards, the cement boards. I make a skin wall out of it through material fabrication, and we have a void and the laterite wall comes. So the west face and south face I have to protect that way, and even there will be courtyards.
So you think there are other ways of doing
I will be taking these ethics and the techniques so that I need a satisfaction end of the day, because I can't do these blunt things. No, end of the day, like we are doing things just to. Okay. So that's how I work out, like with passive cooling and so on. So, okay.
My question, next question is to you, Vivek. What is a good detail? And I'll just add to that, because of the students listening, what does it take for a young architect to become good at detailing?
I think you need to be really sharp at your senses and really understand why there are certain materials. I think the whole learning, you talked about where the learning happens. And from the side, from the workshop, from the material teach you a lot. And since you're not working with material a lot, I think you learn from the persons who are working with the material. So the craftsman teaches you a lot. The real carpenter, the real mason, those persons who are working on the site, those are the persons who can really teach you about the materials. And once you work, I think I've been always being a great admirer of Vinu because he now knows the material, because he has been a craftsman by himself. We have always in office and he has been always in the site. So when you're in the site and when you're working the material, your communication with the material and your knowledge about the material, your understanding about the material, of what it can be and what it should be and what it should not be is very much personal. And that way I think it gives you a lot of freedom to work with that material. So if you don't have that opportunity, then you talk to the craftsman and you understand what can a material material can do. I was in a site yesterday and there was some detail on the stone. And I was using the word, this seems like you have induced so much of pain on that stone. That specific detail looks like you have induced so much of pain on the stone. So, it's like a little unethical there to that material. So I think it's very important to know what you should do with the material. And that is where, like again, if you take the conversations that we had in the KLF and from there, everything is bad. If you put a stone on the earth and it is like, there is nothing sustainable about it. There is no great architecture, no good architecture. It's only about minimizing the impact. So if you can minimize, only way to minimize the impact is to know the material and try to go with the material on that detail.
So also time is an important factor, right? It's not like learning how to detail it takes time, isn't it? I mean, as a student, isn't that also important that whether it's sitting with the craftsman or trial and error or
Absolutely.
This is not something you like this whole idea of starting a practice. I think with these colleges, rather than making all these mistakes and then making the clients suffer, I think it's important to give, as a young architect, to give yourself time to work within a firm, learn how things are, learn from the wisdom that the firm has.
Absolutely. I think it's very extremely important. And I agree with Anand when he said that we should document a project only after 3 to 5 years. And I've always argued in award committees where they always give the projects, completed
Completion date and submission
last 2
date.
years it should be. But that's, last 2 years shouldn't be in the award.
It should be after that.
Yeah. It should be 5 years before. Then you're talking about true architecture, true timeless architecture, and how that material has responded and aged gracefully in that space. And I think even I am very apologetic about what happened to Freedom Square. The most celebrated project of the year. It's been leaching, there has been stones coming out, there has been breakage in the stones. And now we are working on a second phase of the project where we are trying to correct those. So if you had known the material a little bit more, if you had stretched the budget one step ahead to make sure that wouldn't have happened, and if I worked with stones a little bit more there, it wouldn't have happened. So after, it took us 9 years, now it is 5-6 years, we are already on a correction mode. Like the old monuments of that scale, we are never corrected for 100 years. So that is the gap that us architects and the old real craftsmen, the materials has in the world. So I think that is there. So you essentially have to work with the time and material a little bit more for sure, 100%.
Since Komal's not here, I can extend. Is she here? No. Okay, so Anand, my question to you about identity. In some sense, extending to this idea of tropical monsoon. If I'm not mistaken, you've done conservation.
Yeah.
So in conservation, somewhere there is this idea of maintaining the identity of a place, of continuity. Whereas often with architects, we're looking for our own self-expression, trying to make a statement of our own palette, our own style. Can you tell us about that? Because with a lot of projects, and I don't think how the building looks from the outside is the most important aspect, but it has some importance. In terms of choosing materials and the identity and those materials shaping the identity of the building. And these conflicting ideas of self-expression. Is it your expression? Is it the expression of the client? Is it the expression of the place?
I would just make it quick actually. So this is something which is we always think it inside ourselves. So whether basically we do have an ego of as a designer. There is an ego inside us. So what happens here is like we tend to decrease that because we are doing it for somebody. So it's not us we are living in. So we are actually designing it for the people. So you have to understand the context. You have to understand the environment. The place which is setting in. So it is not about the identity also. There are times in which you have to understand about what is the exact function which you are putting into the building, because when Ashwin said that architect should be designing a building, 80% of the design should be done, rest 20% should be happening on by the people itself. So this is almost the same thing that happened in our practice also. There are in which I never say that we do have an identity or we are this kind of an architect that which we does that. We have been always evolving. It's been almost 10 years right now, almost into the practice that we are doing. And starting from 2016, we have been evolving our concept. There is a lot of unlearned things that's happening every day. Like Vivek sir said, even in our memorial building there was a freestanding laterite wall which happened. And our mason came to us and said that, sir, this will be having algae within one drain. So what we put a small chotusa, this thing, sloping roof around it, and it became part of the design later. And so those kind of learning elements that happens from every side throughout the year. So when it comes to this tropical designs and everything, right now what's happening is mostly trend, which most people are running. But I am I'm happy in a way that some of the people are understanding the concepts behind what exactly the residences, the buildings of this tropical, climatic zones should be like. It's kind of a very vast topic in which I can't put it in a single word, but you shouldn't be compromising, an architect shouldn't be compromising, not compromising, putting a lot of his identity for a building. Sometimes it might tamper the entire project for a longer run. So they have to understand, and they have to, we have to be very open. It's a very open, and we have to be very humble also. So that's it.
Okay. So there was one last question, but I'm going to leave it as a question and not to be answered. Is what is it about the way we operate as a profession that we don't have conversations on construction, on detailing, on making, on materials? And our formats of presenting a project are these slideshows that you present 3-4 projects in half an hour, that it misses. So I think there's something about needing to rethink the formats of our events, or certain occasions where we're also talking about construction, we're also talking about detailing and materials. And I think that's something for all of us to think about in the future. Thank you all of you for your conversation.